So I hope you enjoyed that Foursquare experience. And when I do this with students, what I typically like to do after we finish is to ask you to just think about how that experience demonstrates any important ideas about teaching and learning with young children. And since I'm not there, I'm going to ask you just to turn to a neighbor at your table, or a couple of people, just make sure everybody has at least one partner, and just share how you think what we just did might demonstrate an idea about teaching and learning in our work with children. So we'll just take a minute. Okay, there are really lots of things that you could say, and again, I always enjoy that discussion, but you might have said that you notice that there are things about each one of you that are similar, and that would be true in a classroom with children that we work with, that there are things among the children where there are commonalities. You might also have said that you're not all the same, that in other words, you're each unique. That's also definitely true in a classroom full of children. Each child that comes to you is going to be a unique individual. You might have also said communication is really important. That's also true in our work with children and the teaching and learning work that we do. You might have said that flexibility is important. Maybe you didn't say that, but I always say that because your categories, since you didn't know what you were going to do with them, some of you probably found that it was hard to find folks to sign your squares, and so often you might have had to be flexible. You might have had to make some changes, and all of those are things that are important when we think about our work with children in classrooms. One of the things that's really critical in our work with kiddos is the relationships that are built. So relationships among adults and children are absolutely critical to their development and learning, and then relationships among the children in the classroom. And so when we do something like what we just did, the Foursquare, what we're really doing is what we call community building. And so I would say that would be something you might want to write down, the notion of community building. In our work with children in classrooms, community building would start on day one, and it would just continue throughout the days that you're working with children. There should be a sense of community, and that doesn't happen by accident. It's something that we facilitate. But also, I wanted us just to do that for fun so that you could kind of get to know each other. So thank you for participating. And I want to just jump into a little bit of content related to the class. These are things, you probably don't need to write any of this down yet, but let me just say a few things about the class. So the title of the class is Language Development and Emergent Literacy. This is really an important class. I like to think every class that you take is important, but I have a real passion for what's happening with young children in the area of early literacy. And I think there's a lot of evidence that we're pushing children, and that we're underestimating children's ability to think. Children are great thinkers, but we're actually trying to teach children as if they are older, and that really is underestimating their ability, because we're not recognizing that children can think, but they don't think in exactly the same way that adults think. So in the area of literacy in particular, I think that we are doing many children a great disservice. We're teaching reading and writing in ways that perhaps are not most helpful to children. But what's important to recognize, among other things, and I'm sorry, forgive me, here's the phone. What's important, excuse me, I think we've taken care of it. Okay. What's important is to recognize that language and literacy really does begin at birth. And so this class covers the period from birth to 8 years of age. And what that means in terms of school-age kids is that we'll be talking specifically about children pre-K to 3rd grade. This is a methods class. It's a teaching methods class. And so what that means is that much of what we read about, study about, and do together is going to focus on how children learn and how we teach them language and literacy. Now, if you're not an early childhood ed major, you don't plan to teach, or you're not currently teaching, this class still holds a lot of value for you, because I think all adults play a role in how children develop as users of language, both oral and print. And so if you plan to be a parent educator, then this class has a great deal to offer you. If you plan to work for an agency and provide support and help for families, this class holds great promise for you as well. So I think you'll find that whether you are an early childhood ed major or not, that there's much here for you. Knowing that children literacy really begins early in life, I think, is important. There was actually a report from the American Academy of Pediatrics just a few years back, and it was actually a policy statement saying that even pediatricians should be concerned about literacy from the very beginning, and that and we see this widely now. There's a program called Reach Out and Read, where pediatricians actually encourage new mothers and fathers to involve their children in literacy, and it was really based on some incredibly interesting studies of the brain. And what we see is that when young children are listening to stories being read, the particular area of the brain that has to do with integrating visual and auditory information is very active, and it's activated in much the same way that children who are readers would experience that same brain activation. And what we know is that children who are read to less frequently don't have as much activation evident in that particular area of the brain. So what this says is, from the very beginning of life, reading to children is critically important. And so that's just a piece of what we'll be thinking about and talking about in this month as we walk through these days together. So what I'd like for you to do is just, again, in your own notebook, I'd like to ask you 2 questions. And I want you to record your answers, and then we'll revisit these questions throughout the month that we're together. So the first question I want you to answer, I want you to really write it in your notebook. So I want you to answer this question: how do young children learn literacy? So I'm going to ask you to just write that. And you could say language and literacy. So the question really is, how do children learn language, both oral and print? So I want you to just answer that question. How do children learn language and literacy? So hopefully you're writing that down now. How do children learn language and literacy? And then you're going to write a second question, which is, how do we teach literacy? So you should have 2 questions. So we'll turn the video off for just a moment, and I want you to record your own answers. This is individual. You're not going to turn it in to me, but I just want you to write your answers. So let's turn the video off.